Oh, shoot. Hello, everybody. I know that looks like a lot of paperwork. And you know what? The truth is, when we deal with aircraft, a lot of paperwork is involved. Welcome to the Epic Flight Academy in beautiful New Smyrna Beach, Florida. My name is Mike Thompson, and this is the Private Pilot Ground School. To be successful in this course, you must be studying all of this material in Epic's online program and studying and reading those resources. Secondly, view this video in parallel to that content, and of course, number 3, you're going to want to review all of this content with your flight instructor. So, boy, that's a lot of paperwork. Let's see if we can make a little bit of sense of all this paperwork. Now, let me see, where was all that stuff? Oh, hey, look what I found in that pile of paperwork. This is a book called Telling is Not Teaching by yours truly, Mike Thompson. Find it at Amazon.com. But that's not what I was looking for. What the heck is it? Yes, here it is. This is the one I wanted to show you. This is a copy of the slide in the online course. And this is an acronym to help us as pilots remember the required documents for our airplane. Now, notice the acronym says SPARROW. So we want you to think of that little bird called a sparrow. Sparrow, S-P-A-R-R-O-W. What do we mean by that? Well, let's start with the SP. You can see this in our online course. The SP stands for Supplemental Documents. Now, the aircraft may be required to have some supplemental documents. A good example of a required supplemental is the G1000 Operator's Manual. The A stands for the Airworthiness Certificate. Now, all aircraft are issued an Airworthiness Certificate when they're built by the manufacturer. And here's a question for you. How long is that Airworthiness Certificate good for? It is good forever. Well, it's almost good forever. It's good forever if the pilot and the operator are complying with all of its maintenance requirements in parts 91 and 43 and complying with all airworthiness directives, which we'll talk about in a moment. The first R stands for registration. The registration for the aircraft is good for 3 years. The second R stands for the radio telephone license. Now, you might have never thought of this, but the Federal Communications Commission, that's the FCC, not the FAA, the FCC views us as a flying portable radio station. And they want that aircraft to have a radio station license and the operator to have a radio station operator certificate. Now, this is only true currently if your aircraft is flying internationally. If we're flying domestically, that requirement is no longer a requirement. The O stands for the Owner's Manual, or some type of an AFM or a POH. We just talked about that in another video. And then the W stands for weight and balance documentation. Now, it's important that we don't just remember that acronym, but it's what that acronym stands for. And that acronym is meant to remind us of the important background information. So what we need to remember is when we look at the airworthiness requirement, that requirement is from FAR 91203. The registration and radio license, if that radio license is required, is also 91.203. The operating limitations we talked about in another video, that's 91.9 that says I must operate the aircraft in compliance with the AFM or the POH. And then finally, the weight and balance requirements. Now, I don't know exactly if there's a regulation that specifically says weight and balance requirements. Here's the one that you want to refer to with your flight instructor, 91.103, which says that we have to make ourselves available to all of the information pertinent to the safe flight of this aircraft. So weight and balance would certainly be information that would pertain to the safety of our flight. The next thing that we want to discuss is something called placards. Now, placards are extremely important to the pilot for the safe operation of the aircraft. Placards will give limitation information, limitations in weight, operation, air speeds, G loads, allowed maneuvers, etc. These placards will be posted in and about the aircraft. Now, here's an important thing to remember. If I am operating this aircraft without those placards, it is technically not airworthy. So if I'm doing a thorough pre-flight, which of course your Epic flight instructor will teach you how to do, you might be wondering, how am I going to know if I have all the placards required for this airplane? Aha, the answer will be in your POH. In Chapter 2, you will see all of the placards listed. And here from our online course, you can see an example of some of those placards. So the POH will show you the placards that are required, and then during your pre-flight, you'll make sure you find them all on that aircraft. Now, our third and final topic for this short video is inspections. When we talk about aircraft inspections, we use another acronym called AVIATE, and you can see that here. AVIATE, but notice the I is not really an I, it's a 1. Here's why. That first aircraft, or that first A, stands for the annual inspection. The aircraft must be inspected annually, and this is in compliance with 91.409. The V stands for the VOR check. Now, if the aircraft is going to operate in the Instrument Flight Rules environment, in other words, IFR, this VOR must have been checked within the preceding 30 days, or we cannot legally use it for navigation. That we will find in 91.171. Then our third letter, which is not really a letter, but it's a number. You see that, AV1. The 1 stands for 100, and that means a 100-hour inspection. If the aircraft is operated for hire or operated for flight instruction, it must have a 100-hour inspection. Again, we're in 91.409. And then the second A stands for altimeter. And we think of the altimeter as part of the pitot system. You all know that from earlier videos. So it's an altimeter and pitot system inspection, and that inspection must be in place in accordance with 91.411, and that has to happen every 2 years or 24 months. And then the T stands for transponder. The transponder must also be inspected every 2 years or 24 months. That's 91.413. And then finally, that last E stands for ELT. The ELT is the Emergency Locator Transmitter. We talked about that in another video. And it must be inspected every 12 months. And that inspection is found in 91.2 07. Well, folks, you can see when I came in with all of those papers that there is a lot of paperwork involved with aircraft. Now, we just want to take you to one last slide in the online course and take a look at the Airworthiness Directives. The Airworthiness Directives, or called ADs for short, are regulated to us by FAR Part 39. And these ADs have three types. We have the NPRM, or Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Then we have the Final Rule. And then we have emergency ADs. Now, these three types are spelled out for us at a very useful website. I hope you've all been there. It's FAA.gov. FAA.gov talks about these three types of ADs. Now, ADs commonly are complied with in a variety of ways. And it's not uncommon for an AD to either require a one-time inspection or a recurring inspection. So sometimes people think of ADs as having two types. What we mean is there's, generally speaking, two ways to comply. Here's an example of an AD. Now, I know you can't read this, but this comes in an email or in the US mail, and it's technical data provided to your airframe and power plant mechanic that maintains your airplane. This is an example of an AD for a PA-28, and it's a very technical document. As I start to read it, I see that it is specific to aircraft, specific to serial numbers, and as I continue to read it, I see that there's background information. You can see it's quite technical, and it even then talks about their authority to make these rules, how they came up with this AD, and then as we continue to read it, your mechanic is going to read through methods to comply with this AD. And in methods to comply, again, it's usually either a one-time or a recurring AD. The next thing we want to mention is the deferral provision. This is in 91-213 Delta. Okay, and that's not necessarily always an AD. It's a deferral provision. You see that in 91-213 Delta. Also, in 91-213, we'll talk about the MEL, or Minimum Equipment List. All right, and then we want you to study preventive maintenance. Now, this is going to be in Part 43, Appendix A. If you review this appendix carefully with your flight instructor, you will see that if you hold a private pilot's certificate and you're operating under Part 91, there's actually quite a long list of preventative maintenance items that you, as the pilot, are legally allowed to do. And then finally, the special flight permit. This is 91-203 Bravo, and it talks about the fact that you can get a special flight permit to fly an aircraft that may not be in compliance with all of its paperwork, but could still be flown safely. Now, you can make your case to the FAA. The engineers and inspectors will come out and work with you, and once everyone is satisfied that yes, in fact, it could be flown safely, even though it's not in compliance with all of its paperwork, you may get a special flight permit. Well, folks, that just about wraps it up for inspections and aircraft documents. We'll see you next time.